This is John Paul Dr. Speed Selling, welcoming you to the latest installment of the Raging Verbalist. This is Raging Verbalist number 241, and for those of you keeping track of it, welcome. We had some technical difficulties, but we're back up and running. We will not be stopped, so we're out there doing it right now. Glad that you're here, and you can catch us every week on YouTube and our Facebook group, which is Position to Win Book, Position to Win Book. And check that out. We talk about a variety of things. Today's a very personal topic for me. And hopefully you will hit a like, you'll hit a subscribe. And if you want to be bugged, you'll hit a notification because you'll be pinged here and there. Now, I am joined, as always, by the ever lovely Sandra. And Sandra will be asking me the questions that you would ask if you were sitting there, but you're not. Sandra is. Hey, welcome, Sandra.
Hello, how are you doing? Internet is here. A busy day.
Oh, it's been one of those days. You know, you've got your internet problems. I got an ant infestation. Now it's all happening. I don't know if those are the two signs of the apocalypse, but it was kind of crazy. So yes.
All
So
right,
what are we
so
talking about today? What are we talking about today?
all right, so it's a very special happy 100th heavenly birthday for your father. So can you tell us when and where was your father born?
So my father, who was Chester Walter Mendoza, and he was actually born on August 6th, 1924. So we're just a little past it. That was a Wednesday for those of you who want to keep track of that. Any Rain Man out there and all that kind of stuff. And he was actually born in Lwów, Poland, which is LW with a little accent OW. And now it's part of Ukraine. Thank you, Joe Stalin. So he was born there, and that's the genesis of it. Without him having that, that would not be me, and we wouldn't be sitting here.
All right, and where did he grow up?
Well, first off, he had to come to the shores, and he always had this story that he was born in Pennsylvania. Told us that till we found his real birth certificate. We realized that he was, they don't give those kind of birth certificates out in Pennsylvania. So he was born in Poland, and he came to Canada in 1927 with his older brother Stan, who was actually my godfather, and his father, whose name was Walter, and my grandmother, whose name was Mary. So they came to Canada in 27, and that's the as best as we can know, because we find them in a manifest, and we have them showing up in Canada. They end up in New York City. He grew up in New York City on Manhattan in the Lower East Side. And if you've never seen the Lower East Side, at the time, it was not what I would call the real cool part that it is now. I mean, every inch of Manhattan that has, that you can put anything in is really just, gone up in value. So he grew up in the Lower East Side, and, so New York was his playground, if you will.
And what was it like for him growing up in New York City?
Well, I'm sure that it was better than being in, Poland and all of the unsettledness that was going on then in Europe. But they actually landed and showed up at a time of the Great Depression, and that meant that jobs were hard to find. Things were very tough. My grandfather never really could speak English very well, and my grandmother actually supported the family. In fact, every time I go to New York City, I always locate the Chrysler Building. If I can go there, I do, because she was one of those Polish washerwomen who would go down there and scrub the floors at night and hands and knees and do that and keep that going. Well, even doing that, the reality is that they never had enough money, so they were actually evicted during the Great Depression 17 times that my father could recollect. So rocky, bumpy road.
And did he serve in the military?
World War II happens, and he's a young guy, and one day he comes home from working, and my grandfather says to him, you've got this letter from the U.S. president, because that's how they used to send it out, and it said that of course you're invited to come down to the recruitment office, and you're drafted, essentially. So he went into the Navy, and in the Navy he served in World War II in the Pacific. He was on the USS Minneapolis, which was a heavy cruiser. Its call sign was CA-36. and he was there from 1943 all the way to the end of the war in 1945. At which time he saw a lot of combat. He ended up getting 11 combat stars, and fought in many big battles. One of them was the Battle of the Coral Sea, which I remember because he would tell us that story vividly over and over again, and 10 other battles that he got a star for.
And what did he do in the Navy?
Well, he had the excellent job of being on the anti-aircraft battery, and that meant that as the Japanese were losing the war, they came up with this really cool idea of putting in a thing called the kamikaze planes, in which they would fill these planes up with essentially napalm. And the design of it was is that you would have a pilot who was going to commit suicide. That's why they called them suicide, suicide squads or suicide planes. And they would come in and hit the ships and blow up and hopefully do lots of damage and all of that. So sitting in the anti-aircraft battery in that turret with other guys, his job was actually to have his back to the looking out and listening over the headphones as the command center would say, here's the range of the planes, hold your fire, hold your fire, hold your fire, because of course you can see them but you can't hit them was the big problem. And he told a very dramatic story about how there was a suicide plane coming in, and all of a sudden they open fire, fire at will, and they're shooting at this plane, and everybody is shooting at this plane, and it comes in, and as they rotate that turret, and if you've ever seen the original Star Wars, where he's sitting in the turret and they rotate it, well, that's been going on for a long time. And as they're rotating it, all of these guys, like my father and his buddies sitting in there, look up, and he said, "Look, we made eye contact with the pilot, and the pilot went right over the ship. Nobody hit this guy. He missed the ship, and he just flew out over the horizon." And he goes, "My guess is either we were super lucky because if we had hit him, it would have exploded right over us and rained all of that, bad news on us. But he just flew and kept going. So obviously, the pilot decided, maybe today is not the day I want to die."
And what was the most dramatic thing that happened?
So circumstances being what they are, and fate being fate, on August 6th, 1945, as they were preparing to support the invasion of Japan, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And of course, the news came through, which made everybody feel like the war was going to come to an end. And that was good because, of course, they had been hearing about how the war had ended in April in Europe. And here they were in August, and they had been fighting. And, he was at Okinawa. I mean, he had gone through a lot of war. And so that was his birthday celebration, if you will. And I'm not trying to make light of what happened at Hiroshima, but you talk about having a 21st birthday where some people say, "Yeah, I remember it because I, went out and got drunk or went out and, did whatever mayhem." But there he was on this ship with all these guys, and, Hiroshima happened. So that was like the most dramatic thing in the war for him, because it was like, not only did that happen, but now in all likelihood, the war was going to come to an end because, he was involved in a lot of shooting.
And what did he do after the war?
So during the war, he had seen all of the West Coast because, of course, that's where the Pacific Fleet would sail from. So he had been, from Seattle to San Francisco to Los Angeles to San Diego. And, as he said, you fight a war, and then the war is over, and then they put you on a troop transport and, plug along the coast. And he said, "Well, I really want to get off in Los Angeles and stop and not go further." And they said, "Nope, it's not how we do it. You got to get a round trip ticket. We're shipping you back." So they put him on a train, and he went back to New York City. He reconnects with his friends, and they're talking, and everybody is, most of them just came back from the war. Some of them with mental stress, PTSD kind of things, and others with real physical wounds, but everybody was affected. And so as he got back together with these guys and they would go out drinking and stuff, everybody had big plans. They kept telling him our big plans. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And my father said, I'm going to move to LA. I'm going to go to Los Angeles. I'm going to go to California and I'm going to do that. And all of his friends said, oh, bullshit. You're not going to do that. I mean, everybody says they're going to do that, but nobody ever leaves. Nobody's ever going to do that. And one day he went and he was working, came back and was working, went to Grand Central Station in New York and bought a one-way ticket to LA and went to the bar and said, slapped it on the bar and said, I'm going to LA. So he takes the train and goes to LA and he's living in downtown LA and, lives through an earthquake, goes through that. One of the things, and I've talked about this before about, the Indianapolis 500, he buys this Philco radio, which sadly we don't have. I mean, I don't know for whatever reason, it ended up not making it all the way through, but that was one of his big acquisitions. So he had a cool radio, and so he was there, and then he decided he needed to go back to New York, needed to go see his parents, and do that. So he buys a ticket, but he's going to stop off in Denver because by that point in time, my mother and her brother and sister and her parents had moved to Colorado for a variety of reasons. And he's going to stop off and see him and stay there because my father was good friends with my Uncle George. And he stops off and, romance blossoms with my mother. And well, he never makes it back to New York at that point in time. So he did that. They got married in 1949. And they were together until she passed away almost 50 years later. So that's what he ended up doing, and that was the process that took place. So that's pretty amazing to me, and it talks a lot about kind of the staying power of what happened. And it's one of those things as we were putting this together, and I was thinking about telling this story and why this story is important. And it's important because I think everybody needs to kind of understand their own family story, their own situation, and what takes place. And with that, one of the things I would also suggest at this point in time is maybe you ought to figure out how your business is going to do. So here's a shameless plug: go out and buy my book. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. It just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize a position to win. You'll pick it up at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Books a Million, wherever books are sold. You can ask for it and get a physical copy. You can also go to positiontowinbook.com, positiontowinbook.com, and go pick it up, and you're going to get an autographed copy of that, and which would be excellent. Also, you can get digital versions on Kindle, Nook, and Apple iBooks. So go check that out. Also on Kindle, exclusively on Kindle, is Remote Work for a Better World. So if you want to be in the gig economy, go check that out and you'll learn how to make more money and do that better. Now, what is next, Sandra?
All right. So what are some of the best habits your father taught you?
Well, I'm a voracious reader. My father loved to read, and really some of the happiest memories that I have early on is that my father would pack us in his car and then eventually his truck, because he loved his truck. And what he would do is take my brother Michael and I, we'd go downtown, and we went to all of these different bookstores, and big bookstores, little bookstores, hole in the wall bookstores. They used to have specialized bookstores. Denver was like a hotbed for having all of this. And so part of it is he would impart that love of reading and knowledge and what would happen. And to this day, when I can actually find one, I love to go to bookstores when I'm on the road, because you never know what you're going to find and what treasures will behold that are out there. And then, since he loved to read and he was always, wanting to learn more and learn how to do things, which is, he passed that on to me. And I've had that for years and I guess forever. And that's something that I learned from him, whether it's a habit or an obsession. If you see the number of books that I have stacked everywhere, some would say it's an obsession. No wonder, my wife, who was trained as a media specialist, that would be a librarian to you and I, got to have that happen, because anybody else would say, why do you have all these books? Well, she kind of understands. There is no 12-step program to get rid of that idea. And in fact, he loved the reading part, and he thought you could learn just about anything from, a book. He grew up in New York City, He never knew how to drive. Now he's living in Denver, Colorado. He doesn't want to keep taking the bus. Bus is a bummer because it's less reliable than having your own car. But he doesn't know how to drive. And he's like, well, I guess I could go to driving school, but I'm not sure if I want to do that. So he gets a book on how to learn how to drive, and he reads a book on how to drive. And because he has this book on how to drive, he teaches himself, because this book is like a manual, a how-to manual, how to drive a car. And literally, he taught himself how to drive a stick shift car without anybody else really showing him, by reading a book and figuring out how to make it work. Now, yes, he stalled it. Yes, he had some issues, but he learns how to do that. And then, he can't drive it to the DMV himself. So he's got to find a buddy at work to drive him to the DMV, even though he's the one who owns the car. And he goes in and he aces the test and he does the driving and all of that. So, that tells you the power of doing that. And actually, when he passed away, we calculate that he had about 10,000 books, and it was kind of sad because so many people wouldn't even take the books. But yes, he loved, that was one of the things he loved to do. And I have boxes and boxes of books. And by the way, for those of you who are Sandra fans, and we know who you are, I would have never met Sandra. Maybe I would have met Sandra, but I probably would not have gotten to know Sandra. But at Freedom Fest, my brother Michael and I would go over and we buy lots and lots of books. She doesn't want to say that we're in the top, top, but we're pretty close, because we would go buy tons of books, and I'd have to ship them back to Colorado for Michael, and I'd pack them in my car and drive back to LA. And but I'm just telling you, without that, we may not have Sandra with us today. So there you go. Reading can take you lots of places.
That's right, it can. All right. What was his sense of style?
Well, even though he grew up in rather humble circumstances, he went out even when he was single and would go out and buy suits and go get suits. And he was in very good shape and stayed in great shape his entire life. And when he passed, he owned over 50 suits. And, and it was funny because he would go like shopping at all of these thrift places, because people would die and they would donate the suits, and he'd end up with incredible suits, take them to a tailor and have them nip here and tuck there. And he loved them. And then when my mother passed and he decided that he needed to kind of move on with his life, is that he always loved to dance. And in fact, he encouraged Michael and I to learn how to dance, and we went to the Polish club, joined a dance troupe, and learned how to dance. So he always loved to dance. So he decided that he wanted to learn ballroom dancing. So he goes to the library and he finds out that he can, take out a VHS tape and watch this and learn how to dance. So here he is, dance, just like a Fred Astaire movie. And if you don't know who that is, boo-hoo on you. But he would like dance with a broom or a mop to learn how to do the steps and then go out and do that. So he learned how to dance by watching videos and reading about how to dance. And it was, to me, that's just kind of a classic version of what he did.
And did you inherit some of your speaking talent from him?
I think I did. And early on, my father was very strict. I guess strict would be, he wasn't really mean about, but he was very adamant that you speak well, that you talk well, that you articulate what you can, that you get a really good vocabulary, that you keep building on it, you keep doing that. And to that end, he himself was a captivating storyteller. And whenever he was at parties or gatherings, he would go out there and people would sit around and he would tell them stories, whether it was about World War II or some of his travels or the things that he did in life, because he did a lot of things like when the when the art museum of Denver opened, we went there like on the very first week that it opened. And it was funny because of course my father, who was a tool and die maker, he didn't, he didn't have the nice clothes on, and people kind of looked down on him, but he knew who the painters were, and he stressed to us what that was like. And in a sense, would tell me that it's so important that if you learn something, you need to tell somebody else. You need to essentially pass the message along, and by doing that, you actually become better at whatever you want to do. So that was really cool. And then there were high schools that would ask for veterans to come in and speak about their what adventures, maybe not adventures, but their experiences of World War II. And he started doing that and became very popular doing that. And he would get great ovations, and people would just love that. And then he started going to senior centers. And whenever there was a break in the action, couldn't keep him away from the microphone because, the band would take a break, and he would get up on stage, not having anybody say, geez, do you want to go do this, Chet? And he would start telling people jokes. And, maybe he was a closet comedian, stand-up comedian, and nobody knew about it. So I think I got a bunch of that because he would sit there and talk to a great number of people. And that was really cool. So yeah, I saw that my entire life. And obviously it continues to this day for me.
And when you look back, what was an important lesson?
Well, I think probably the most important lesson that my parents, my father in particular, taught me, because here's a guy who worked 9 hours a day, 5 days a week, sometimes half day on Saturday, but he always had time to help others and serve others, and he was willing to help just about anybody who needed help. It didn't matter where you were from, didn't matter what your background was. Let's see, we resodded the Polish church's front little yard, but we had to go. You know, did we go buy sod? No, one of the parishioners was taking sod out to make a flower garden, so we went out and we got the sod, rolled it up, put it in the truck, did all that stuff. My mother used to line up people who needed furniture or appliances moved or help, especially if somebody was older or was sick or needed that kind of help. And we would do that. My father was adamant that we not take money, that if they were going to give us money, they needed to give it to a church, not our church, but whatever church that they were going to do with. And frankly, some people were embarrassed or shy or didn't really know if they were going to do that. But he would warm them up, and he would always lend that helping hand. And I think that was a great lesson because you know we're launching the book 2019. We're at Freedom Fest. We're getting excited because they're going to launch a book that took me 30 years to get written. And we're sitting there, and Herman Cain is going to have an event. Sadly, he passed during COVID, and his person who was trying to get set up in the room and everything for this special event that he was doing, they weren't there. So myself, my brother, and Gabe Batista, my co-author, co-conspirator, we set this whole thing up. And Herman was very gracious and very nice. And sadly, we didn't have a relationship beyond that because just a few months later, because of COVID, it was over. But I would have probably never had that sense of helping people if it wasn't for my parents doing that. And frankly, we would do it not every weekend, but every other weekend, always doing this. And I don't ever really remember my father turning anybody down. So, in that way, it was a really spectacular lesson. And part of life's lessons, part of what I would share with all of you, is that you need to be the lesson, not in a preachy way, but actually doing it, and not asking people for. I guess you could ask people for compensation if you want, but you do it because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to help somebody out who may need just that extra hand, that extra step, or extra something that they need at that point in time. So I think that was probably the most important lesson, which is, uh, help people out and help them understand that they should pass that forward, and pay it forward is probably the best way to do it.
And that sounds like an amazing life. So when did he pass?
Well, we know the exact time. I mean, I'm a person who travels with two watches and all of that, and in fact, here's the tease, because the anniversary of his passing is January 10th, and he passed January 10th, 2006, at exactly 6:33 p.m. In Denver, Colorado. And what we're going to do is we'll do a Raging Verbalist on January 10th, 2025, which will be the 19th anniversary. And I'll tell you his story of his final 3 days, final several days. It's too much to get into today. And I think it's a great way to understand ourselves what we should or shouldn't do. Obviously, he was great influence to myself and my brother and those that he touched, and was very special. And the best part about it is that, I got to see him through many different phases, ups and downs in my life and his life, and how we ended up in the very end. And if you have somebody special in your life that you have not talked to, all I'm going to tell you is life is short. So, with that, I'm going to tell you that I'm John Paul Mendoza, choking up a little bit here, the Raging Verbalist. And for myself and the ever lovely Sandra, this has been the story of my father's 100th birthday, if he had made it. And in some ways, of course, he did. We'll see you next week.